Does anybody have any questions? Okay. To discuss verse 9 and verse 7.
So you mentioned the dynamic that Paul raises in Romans, where he shows that the Jews and Gentiles in the world are also in the church, or in the kingdom of Satan and the kingdom of God. You describe how the people in the world that are God's people, they're going to be coming into the fold, and there's going to be a group that goes out or overthrown, and they're going to be SDAs on the general basic sense. But you didn't, or you were reticent to go further to explain who that would be exactly. Could you explain that?
So, if you remember, I gave you all the clues that I think, or the direction in which a person would head to define what that or who that group would be. The reason why I was reticent to do that, not because I'm reticent to identify the group, but I'd be reticent to identify the group without demonstrating why that group would be who I think that it would be, and to show that would take a bit of time. So that's why I fell short of doing that work. It'd probably take maybe 1 or 2 presentations to do that, but I didn't want to just leave that and just say that it's just SDAs in general, because I think we can begin to see that it's not as straightforward an argument as that. So just to give one example, if we went to Zechariah chapter 2. So the question that Brother Brown is asking is, when we went to Daniel 11 verse 21, there are 2 groups. There's a group that are overthrown, and there are a group that escape. And I'm saying these are polar opposites, but they're also the same. They're God's people in both groups. One escape and one don't. And this escape is by slipperiness, with the idea that this group is already in the clutches of the King of the North in his hand, and as he tries to tighten the grip upon them, they slip out. So they're already in his grasp. And I'm saying that they're in prison and they're going to break free and they're going to escape. And therefore, I'm saying the inference would be that the overthrown we're now able to define without doing a word study. The Bible is defining itself using these rules. So overthrow means to be put into prison. They're going to go into prison. And who would go into prison? It would be a group of people that were outside or not incarcerated. So I think that you can just see straight from this story. But to try to demonstrate who they were, because this is the world and this is the church at that simple level, but we know in this world it's Edom, Moab and Ammon, and therefore in the church who would it be? Because Edom, Moab and Ammon is one of these 2 groups. So in the church it's not just a simple matter of it's the church that are overthrown. Who in God's church is going to be overthrown? So to try to demonstrate that, if we were to, as an example, Zechariah chapter 2, and we went to verse 6, it says, Ho, ho, come forth and free from the land of the north, saith the Lord. For I have spread you abroad as the four winds of the heaven, saith the Lord. Deliver thyself, O Zion, that dwellest with the daughter of Babylon. So, who's giving that prophecy? It's Zechariah. And Zechariah's speaking to whom? The daughter of Zion, which are God's people. So he's speaking to God's people, and he's telling them to come out of Babylon. So for him to tell you to come out of Babylon, I'm suggesting, even without knowing the history, he must be out of Babylon himself. He has already come out of Babylon, and he's saying, why don't you come out of Babylon as well? So all we can see in this dynamic is this: God's people are split into two. One group have already left Babylon and another group have remained. So then when you start applying the history to this story, you see that this is in the history of the second decree, or Darius. So the third decree hasn't even happened yet. Is that's okay so far? Mm-hmm. Yeah? So if you're okay at that level, and then we were to make an application and say that the third decree hasn't happened yet, and when that third decree goes forth, it's like the third angel's message. And if it's the third angel's message, then at a simple level, that would be the Sunday law issue. So this is an experience that's happening pre-Sunday law. You can develop an argument to show that. And so that is teaching us, from this context, I'm suggesting that there's a group of people that leave under Cyrus's decree, first angel's message, and the vast majority of God's people remain in Babylon. Then at a later stage, under the second decree, the temple's being rebuilt. Darius has made a decree to allow that to happen. Zechariah is going to stand up and say, the rest of you people that remain in Babylon, you need to come out. So this is before Ezra 7. So I'm just going to make an application of that to say, if this is the third decree, and this is the second, and this is the first, that Zechariah is here. And there's a group of people that have remained in captivity, and they're going to be called out now. And the people that are calling them out are people who are in this history that had already been called out. I'm saying they'd already left. So that's what that literal history is dealing with. A group of people have left under the first decree, and then under the second, there's a second call to come out. So you can make an application, I'm suggesting, that this is the story of the priests and Levites. So you know that in this history here, there are vast swathes of God's people who are where? Still captive in Babylon, still in prison. So when you come to this history here, which is, I'm suggesting in this history, the son-in-law history, you begin to have to then identify who is free and who is not free. The people who never left Babylon in that history, were they ever free or not? So it becomes a more subtle argument of what it means to imbibe the doctrines of the papacy.
So it's either going to be, as I understand it, the priests that have left Babylon already, or the Levites that were called out and then gone back into captivity?
So either way, whether you talk about the priests or the Levites, you've identified in your statement that there are people who have already left,
yeah,
and then they're going to go back.
Yeah.
Or you have people who never left, and if they never left, they were never freed from the clutches of Babylon.
Mm-hmm. So they would be a part of the Gentiles in God's church, in accordance with that diagram.
At least they're here, yeah, they're part of Satan's kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're saying that there's some who left under the first decree of Cyrus, some left under Zechariah, under Zechariah's call. But those who are left in Babylon, they cannot be overthrown because they're not.
So,
they're not free, so they can't go into prison because they're already there.
Yes, if we're going to say what freedom looks like, we know what freedom looks like because the people who escape are going to define what that freedom looks like. You're going to be freed from the doctrines of Babylon. And we mark in 1141, this is the Sunday law issue that's going to be marked, that we're marking. At a simple level, if we pick one of the doctrines of Babylon, it's Sunday sacredness. So if we pick that one up, that you're escaping from that, you have to ask yourself what you're going to be overthrown into. You're going to be overthrown into that same issue. But Babylon doesn't only have one doctrine, it has a number of different doctrines. And what's the premier doctrine of Babylon or the papacy?
Sunday sacredness,
So
immortality.
I would argue it's neither of those. It's not Sunday sacredness or the immortality of the soul. They have one that's even more prominent. It's the millennium issue, the issue of no time. And we see that brought to view in these histories in a subtle way, because these prophets are saying it's now time to do something, like now time to build, now time to come out, and people are saying it's not time yet. In the Millerite history, what's the premier fight about? It's about whether or not it's time for the Lord to return. And you've got a whole group of people on that side that say, we don't even know when that's going to happen. They use the argument that no man knows the day or the hour, but that argument is based upon the papal doctrine of the secret rapture, or what they called in the Millerite history, the millennial argument. And that we know is a papal doctrine. In fact, it's the premier papal doctrine that's going to be used to quash the Millerite movement. So when you have people today who say there is no time in Adventism, that's in this history here, what are they doing? They're holding on to papal doctrine. And when we say they're holding on to that papal doctrine, when was that papal doctrine developed for us? It was developed in the history preceding this, when we've been in captivity for 126 years. So that papal captivity, which is all about not having the ability to time set, then gets carried over into a new dispensation. If you hold on to that doctrine, that papal doctrine, you were never freed from Rome. So we've argued in our movement before that the people who are overthrown are these bad Adventists. And I'm suggesting it may not be so.
And verse 41 is the Sunday law, and our Sunday law was 2014, when time became an issue. So people could be overthrown by time from then.
Yeah. You know, we talk about spiritualism having entered into Adventism, and whilst I don't want to strongly say, you know, that's wrong, I would say that spiritualism, in its proper sense, in its proper usage, is not a tool that Satan uses to overcome God's people. Adventists are not into spiritualism, and I say that knowing about spiritual formation and how we use spiritualism. You know, in our movement now, we say, you know, every time you depart from God's word, that is spiritualism. You know, we make that kind of an application, but that's not spiritualism in its proper sense. If you go back and check how Ellen White's going to use it, spiritualism is a weapon of Satan that's used against the world, not against the church. Because the church can't be attacked with spiritualism, because our defence is what? to the Bible. The Bible will defend you against spiritualism, because spiritualism is not following the Word of God, and every Adventist, by definition, follows the Word of God. But we make a subtle argument and say, yeah, but we're not following it properly. If you don't follow the Word of God properly, that turns you into a spiritualist. And I'm saying I don't think that's a pure, clean argument. You can make some kind of inference to that, but it's not really. Ellen White wouldn't do it that way. She says the attack upon God's people is what? It's not spiritualism. It's covetousness. Our problem is covetousness, not spiritualism. She makes this distinction between the two groups, straight out of Early Writings, one of her premier early books. You see that at the very beginning after, I think it's the Third Angel's Message, Third Platform, then it's spiritualism, covetousness, then the shaking, then I think it's the sins of Babylon, the loud cry. So she does this back-to-back comparison of two groups, the world and the church, the world and the church. And when you do that, our problem is not spiritualism, our problem is covetousness. And covetousness is a code word for Laodicea. Laodicea is worldliness. Turning your focus from our mission as God's people, which is heaven, down to earth. And we know that's an issue because Paul tackles that issue. Where does Paul tackle the issue? That your sight is in the wrong place. We're supposed to be looking to heaven, but we're looking here to earth.
Hebrews.
Sorry?
Hebrews?
He does it in a number of places, but to me the clearest place that you can see that is in Galatians chapter 4. He says Jerusalem which is above and Jerusalem which now is. And all the bad people are looking at Jerusalem here on earth. And all the good people are looking to Jerusalem in heaven. It says a similar argument in Hebrews 8, and you can go to 9 and 10. But there he's not so pointed in his argument. He just says things like, what's here on earth is about to be done away with. But in Galatians 4, he specifically says, the people who are on earth are in bondage. The people who are in heaven are free. So I'm arguing that Laodicea, the Laodicean experience, is a person who's taken his eyes, her eyes, off their mission, and now is focused upon the earth. In a crass way, you're interested in your house here on earth and building up your house, than building up, a treasure in heaven or the mansion that you're about to go to there. It's, which house are you really paying attention to? Is it the one here on earth or the one here and there? That's really what the Laodicean condition is about. We want better clothes, better car, better house. We get all of that in heaven, but we want it here on earth. Our focus and attention is shifted. And that is not spiritualism in its truest, strictest sense. Spiritualism is basically, you put the Bible away and you say the Bible is trash, it's just not true. And no Adventist believes that. They wouldn't be an Adventist. They might manipulate the Bible, they may have it upside down, they may say Ellen White was a guide to help you in the Bible study, but no one outright, openly trashes the Bible or does something, horrible to it, even in their thinking. So they're not into spiritualism, they're into covetousness. So the reason I mention all of that is that these people here, Adventists, are still holding on to papal doctrines, which means they're still in captivity. They were never freed. And there's 3 papal doctrines that hold you. One of them is the state of the dead, which we all know about. The other one is Sunday sacredness, which we all know about. But the one that we're not clear about, Adventists, I think many of them aren't even aware of it. And in 4SP, Ellen White calls it the premier doctrine, is that there is no time. And all of this was developed in the Counter-Reformation. After Martin Luther passed away, you get what's called the Counter-Reformation. In the Counter-Reformation, their argument is that you can't define time. And all of that is in preparation for what event? 1798. all late point in 1798. So you can't identify 1798 because in 1798, the time of the end, now there's going to be an increase of knowledge, and then you can't give the first angel's message which says the hour of his judgment is come. You lose your ability to do that if you hold on to these papal doctrines. So, you know, this argument about time setting in Ellen White quotes is, you know, a lot more serious than just understanding the Ellen White quotes. Because someone was asking at breakfast, is the Laodicean condition an experience or a dispensational phenomenon? I don't know if people understand what that means. Is that if you got a history here and you said, I don't know, like 5, 6 and 7, so this would be dispensation, the 5th, 6th and 7th dispensation. Is Laodicea here, or is Laodicea an experience that you can have in different times? Like a personal experience that you can have? And the answer is, I think it's both. It's a dispensational phenomena and it's a personal phenomena. Because you can see the experience of Laodicea in different stories. The classic one, the easy one to see, is what is the definition of a Laodicean? You know, he talks about, I wish you were hot or cold and not in between. So, just based upon that, I would suggest that a Laodicean condition is someone who is cold and is pretending to be hot. But you're cold and you pretend to be hot. And therefore you give the appearance of being lukewarm. So the coldness is on the inside. You're cold on the inside, but you appear on the outside as being what? Hot. You appear to be hot, but you're cold on the inside. And when you merge those two temperatures, you end up combining the combination of two being lukewarm. And Jesus in Matthew 23 talks about this experience. Cold on the inside looks like what? Dead men's bones that are all full of hypocrisy and rottenness. And on the outside, you're all painted white. Or you get a bowl and you clean the outside and leave the inside dirty. All of these are allusions to the Laodicean condition. But if you went to the 5th church, Sardis, what do we know about Sardis? So let's turn to Sardis. So this is chapter 3, verse 1. Unto the angel of the church of Sardis write these things, saith he that had the 7 spirits of God, and the 7 stars. I know thy works, that thou hast a name, that thou livest and art dead. So, they have a name, and what does the name say? The name says you're alive, but your experience is you're dead. Revelation 3 verse 1. So, Sister Shimura said it's Seventh-day Adventists. I would argue that it's not. I would argue that these are Millerites. This is the Millerite history. I think you can demonstrate that that's so. But what you see is the experience of that church is what? They have a name that says that they're alive, but their experience is that they're dead. And that is exactly the same scenario or situation as Laodicea. They're alive on the outside, dead on the inside. It doesn't say that for Sardis. It says your name says that you're alive, and your name is what? Sardis. Your name is Sardis. And what does Sardis mean? It means to be red, or to be ruddy. And red, especially if you're fair-skinned, is an identification of something that's on the outside that indicates what? Indicates life, because that redness is coming from a flush of blood, and blood contains the life. So that's why you're red. It's an indication that on the outside you look like you're alive, but you have a name that says you're alive. If you're on the inside, you're dead. So it has all the same characteristics. So all I'm saying is that Laodicea is both dispensational, because the fifth church is not Laodicea, it's the seventh church, so it is dispensational, but it's also experiential, because the people in the fifth church are experiencing the same phenomena as what the Laodiceans are doing. But Laodicea and Sardis mean different things. Laodicea means judgment, the people who are brought into judgment, and the people who bring judgment, depending on how you want to view that. So this is judgment, and this is life. Two different names, two different meanings, but similar characteristics, similar experiences. So the only reason I mention that is because when you come to our history here, and you've got the priests and the Levites, and this was the time of the end, if you're okay with that, this would be the darkness, or what we might call the 1260 years of scattering. So the experience that we're having here, this scattering, what is producing that scattering? What experience are we having that scatters us? So if it's 1260, you can see that it's has the properties of the 1260, and this would be the fourth church, Thyatira. If you go to Thyatira, it explains to you what the experience is. It's one chapter back, so it's 218, but we'll go to 220. Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, Thyatira, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which called herself a prophetess, to teach and seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. Built into that story, you have priests and prophets, by the way. Just want us to see that. Because Jezebel, it says, is what? A prophetess. But if you go back to the original story, she's not a prophetess. What is she? She's a priestess. She's the high priest of the prophets of Baal and the prophets of the Grove. So she, although it just mentions prophetess, she has both roles, priests and prophets, and we know that she's the king of the north. So I think it was Sister Daisy was asking more about the priests and the prophets when we were in Isaiah 28. You can show that king of the north has the characteristics of a priest and prophet. So we only went there because here it says she's doing two things to God's people. What are the two things that she's doing? She's teaching and seducing. And the teaching and seduction, who is she teaching and seducing? If we're talking about this history here, and this is the time of the end, this is 1989, who is she teaching and seducing? So this is Adventism. This is God's people that she's doing this to. And who's allowing this to happen?
Her husband.
No, not her husband. If you go to verse 18, it tells you, it says, unto the angel of Thyatira. Verse 20, notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee. Who's the thee? It's the angel of Thyatira. And the angel of Thyatira, you can demonstrate, is the leadership of Thyatira. Which is the leadership of the church. So the leadership of the church are allowing his people, his children, we might call it the laity, in this history, from 1863 to 1989, to be taught and seduced by whom? By Jezebel. Jezebel is teaching and seducing us. And how many Adventists are keeping Sunday here? None. And how many believe in the state of the dead? None. So what are we being taught and seduced into? Yeah, which false doctrine? Because they only have three major ones. It's not the Sabbath and it's not the state of the dead. It's the subject of time. So the subject of time is what we're being tricked or seduced into. And you mark 63 here, but you can go further back to see when this experience is really happening. And it goes all the way back to, depending on the argument you want to develop, 44, 50, you get to 63. We've already discussed the subject of 56, 1856, when higher medicine is going to begin to piece together the information, but he's not able to do that because the church is already in a Laodicean condition and not going to accept what? They're not going to accept his message on the 2520, and the 2520 is going to direct you to a chiasm that brings you to 1863. And in agreement with that, Ellen White is just going to keep on reinforcing this point. No time setting. So there's no time setting that's being discussed in this history because we're being taught and seduced by Jezebel. But this is not Laodicea, this is Thyatira. So when we come into this history, those people that have not come out of the daughter of Babylon, what are they still going to hold on to? The thing that they've held on to in this history. Hopefully we all know. Here, Isaiah 45 and 46, this is the story of Cyrus, King Cyrus. And Cyrus is the first decree. Remember we spoke about that a minute ago. And what is he telling people to do? To come out of Babylon. So, here at the time of the end, what are you supposed to do? Come out of Babylon. So you know the time of the end is a transfer from Babylon to the glorious land. And you can make the same argument not only in 1989, but where else?
1798.
1798 is the same dynamics, because in 1798, in the 1260, who's ruling here?
Jezebel.
This is Jezebel, or we can go to Revelation 17 verse 5, and it's a woman who's riding a beast, and on the title is Mystery Babylon. This is the papal church whose kingdom is where? Europe.
Yeah.
So this is Europe, and what's about to happen in 1798? A new nation is about to rise up. That new nation is the United States, or the glorious land. So you can see people are moving from Europe, or the old world, to the United States, the new world, which is Babylon, to glorious land. So we have this transfer that's happening. We can see it in the story of Cyrus. We can see it in the story of Napoleon. When you see that transfer happening, you know that people are coming out of Babylon here at the time of the end. And to come out of Babylon, come out of Babylonian captivity, means to come out of what? The teachings and the seduction of Babylon. And when you come to 1989, what was that? It was the same issue that the Millerites were confronted with in 1798. When they come out of Babylon, they're not keeping Sabbath here, are they? It's not a Sabbath question. It's a question on what? Time. It's all about time, because the first angel's message says the time of the judgment has now come. We're living in the history where we're now able to predict this time here, which is 1844 for the Millerites. So, coming back to Brother Rayo's question, is who is going to be overthrown? If we're going to follow through with that logic, I'm suggesting the people that are overthrown are not the people who remain in captivity. People who remain in captivity, what is Babylonian captivity in our history here? It's a rejection of time. It sounds counterintuitive. It sounds like what we're not expecting because we're so focused upon Sunday sacredness and the state of the dead. But you know, Adventists aren't into that kind of stuff. You know what everyone's argument is. It's all about time. And this argument about time is not a recent phenomenon. Elder Jeff alluded to this yesterday. We were talking about time and we didn't know it for quite some time. And if you want to use the code word for that is the 2520. The 2520 is now the key that unlocks all the major dates that we have. Whether you go 1989, 1991, 1996, 2001, 2014, 2019, all of those dates that I've just given you, all can be calculated using the 2520 in its various guises. 2520 comes in a number of different shapes and sizes. It could be 126, 151, 220, just 2520. It comes in all these different shapes and sizes, and it's always being used to predict time. So you know why our church, even when they don't realise it, are rejecting 2520, because they're under the control of Satan, right here, and they're going to resist this message of time. And even while we don't even fully comprehend that we're handling time, because we're coming out of this same delusion that they've been seduced into, when we start handling time in a way that we're not familiar with, they're already one step ahead of us and rejecting this. You know, for no legitimate reason, really, if you think about it, because it's on the chart, you think, what's the big deal about that? And the reason is because they, I'm not saying they have a consciousness of it, they know it's connected to the subject of time. And that's why the 2520 becomes such a potent issue. And we're supposed to be called, you know, the disciples of 9/11 or Daniel 11:45 people, but our name gets changed to become 2520 people. And, you know, we kind of struggle with that. But the reality is that's what we are. We're all about defining time, because that's how you escape from papal captivity. The people who escape from papal captivity are not the Sunday issue, it's not the state of the desert, it's the issue on time. It's the first major test that you're going to have to grapple with. Later on, we obviously deal with the subject of Sunday
When you
sacredness.
say false teaching and false seduction, is that saying that there's no time, there's the message is not hung on time? Is that what the false rejection of time means? I don't understand what when you
Yes,
say false.
When
false
Ellen White
teaching on
uses
time.
this subject of time, she's dealing with one issue, and what we do is we take those statements and those comments and morph them to mean something that I don't think Ellen White ever intended them to mean. You know, we can't ask Ellen White what she meant or didn't mean, and what would she be doing today? Would she be in our movement here, or would she be in a conference church cursing us? You know, we can't ask her that question. All we've got is all the evidence that we have to piece together to come and make a conclusion. So I'm saying her statements are dealing with a specific issue at specific times, and they're not connected to the history that we're dealing with. So we can take those statements and apply them in a wrong way. We end up misapplying them. And it's a phenomenon that God's people have done right from the very beginning. They always take God's words and they misapply them, misunderstand what he means, even though they're the truth. Adam and Eve did this right from the very beginning. When he said that you were going to be given a seed, they thought that seed was Cain. And it was not Cain. He's talking about something totally different.
So all those spirit of prophecy quotes that speak of beware of time setting and not to depend on time, or all those different quotes, we should be studying them in context, and what she's saying, she's not really saying, basically. She doesn't mean what she says.
No, she means what she says. We don't understand what she means. I think.
Yeah, okay.
I don't want to say that she doesn't know what she's talking about.
No, I mean, just knowing the correct meaning of what is being said. So she knows what she's saying, but it's our understanding of what she's saying isn't correct, basically. So we're taking it out of
I think we're taking those statements out of context.
Yeah.
We need to understand
And
things
misapplying them.
dispensationally, and we're not doing that. And many of the people who are walking away from these things were giving these thoughts and ideas lip service, you know, only a few short years ago. You know, everybody who's struggling with time setting now, who has been part of the movement, they all knew from Daniel chapter 5, many tekel you're fasting, that's 126 shekels, that took you from 1863 to 1989. Everybody knew that, everybody accepted that. It didn't cause them any problems because we were grappling with those issues, you know, a decade and a half or more, maybe 2 decades, after the event. So we said, that's not a problem because it's past. But I think that was not, you know, a fair assessment of what we had discovered. That now, 1989, which technically is not even the fall of the Soviet Union, which happens 2 years later in 91, we were already grappling with time, but in a way that we were trying to suppress or ignore, based upon those quotes. Okay, so if I've kind of done that, so the next question that Sister Daisy was asking is, can we just quickly review how Babylon, or the king of the north, is the priest and the prophet? So I'm saying, when you read Isaiah 28, for me, it's talking about 2 groups of people that are in rebellion to God. It's the people, the 10 tribes of Ephraim, and the 2 tribes of Judah, which here is described as Jerusalem. There's a transition between the two. From verses 1 to 4, it's talking about Ephraim. And then in verse 5, it says, in that day, in the day of destruction, in the day when this man, the strong and mighty one, is going to look at that fruit, Samaria, and pluck it and destroy it by eating it up. In that day, the Lord would turn to the residue, the remnant of his people, all that's left, basically, which is Judah, Jerusalem, and he would be to them a crown of glory and a diadem of beauty. For a spirit of judgment to him that sitteth in judgment, and for the strength of them that turn the battle to the gate. But in this opportunity where Jerusalem could be saved, they end up falling foul with God, because in verse 7, they have erred in drink and stumbled and fallen as well, and they're vomiting in verse 8. So the priests and the prophets in the 2 tribes in Jerusalem are now not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So in verse 9, it says, well, if they're not going to teach God's people, who is going to do that work for me? And I'm saying from verse 9, and I know I've skipped verse 10, to verse 11, the people that are going to speak to us are going to be the people who are going to teach us this truth. And they're going to do so with, verse 11, a stammering lip and a foreign or another tongue. And I'm saying verse 11 is speaking about the Assyrians that are going to train and teach God's people, or to instruct them, essentially. And this instruction that they're going to give to them is the punishment that happened to Ephraim. The same punishment's about to happen to Jerusalem, and we saw that from verses 14 to 19. So I'm saying, to me, that's what the original application is. And you can see the same story brought to view in 2 other chapters that we discussed. One of them was Habakkuk, and the other one was Ezekiel. When we went to Ezekiel chapter 9, you see a similar dynamic, and when you go to Habakkuk chapter 1 and chapter 2, again you see a very similar dynamic, the identical situation. There's a vision that Habakkuk receives, and this vision that he receives is, what is the vision that he's receiving? that Jerusalem, or God's people, are about to be destroyed. And God tells him to get that vision and write it on tables so that everyone who reads that information can know what's going to happen. But when he sets himself as a watchman, saying that the Babylonians are about to come, everyone's going to do what? They're going to reprove him or argue against him, saying, it's not going to happen to us. It's the same dynamic that we see in Isaiah 28. They're saying these things are not going to come to us because we've made an agreement with death and hell that we're not going to be destroyed. And that's what that argument is going to be in Habakkuk chapter 2. Same discussion. And the vision is the same vision, and the people are the same people. If we're not sure about that, if you turn to Habakkuk chapter 2, it actually tells you. Not Habakkuk chapter 2, Habakkuk chapters 1 and 2. So verse 1, chapter 1 verse 1, the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. That word burden is another word, I'm not saying it's the literal word, another word for vision. So this is the vision of Habakkuk. And it's called a burden because it's not a pleasant vision. It's a bad vision. And you can pick up this word burden. Isaiah talks about it over and over again when he talks about the burden of this country and this country and this country. It's a vision about the destruction of those countries. That's what this burden is. And he's going to describe what this vision is. And we can begin it at verse 5. We drop from verse 1 to verse 5. Behold ye, which means look, behold ye among the heathen, and regard and wonder marvellously. For I will work a work in your days, which you will not believe, though it be told you. So what's being portrayed here is, if you pick up the word marvellously, or wonder, there's a miracle that's about to happen. It says, look at the nations all around you, and there's a miracle that's going to happen. Now, to understand what's going on, you need to know when Habakkuk is doing his ministry. And I'm saying, if you picked up 3 kings, Manasseh, Ammon, and Josiah, Habakkuk is somewhere here. He's somewhere in the reign, during the reign of Ammon and Josiah, somewhere in that history. And God is saying to him, or through him to the people, what's he saying? I'm going to do a miracle. Look at the nations and you're going to see a miracle happen. What is the miracle that's about to happen? I don't know how well we know that history. What's the miracle that's about to happen?
Babylon's going to be raised up.
Chaldeans.
Sorry?
Chaldeans.
Yeah, but I will know the history of that miracle. So what's the miracle that's going to happen, as Brother Stephen just said, is that the Babylonians or the Chaldeans are going to be raised up. And that raising up of the Chaldeans happens at what battle? Carchemish. So the miracle that's being referred to here is the miracle or the marvellous working of God's hand at Carchemish. So Carchemish is the demise of the Assyrians and the raising up of the Babylonians. And this, if you looked at the groups, at the nations or the people, it would be a miracle because you would never expect that to happen. The Assyrians could not lose that fight. They were so much stronger, so much more powerful. So God is saying, before the event, just before Carchemish, which is essentially during the reign of Josiah, a miracle is about to happen. The Chaldeans are about to be raised up. And no one would expect that to happen. So once you see that, the burden is not that. The burden is that when the Chaldeans are raised up, what are they going to do? They're going to turn around and they're going to come and destroy God's people. Because who was the protector of God's people? It was the Assyrians. The Assyrians and God's people, they were in a league together. They were like their protector. And so once their protector is gone, the Chaldeans are going to come and they're going to destroy God's people. And as you run through that history from Zedekiah, from Jehoiakim to Jehoiakim to Zedekiah, that was an unnecessary event because it didn't need to happen. If they had just obeyed the Babylonians and kept faith with them, that wouldn't have happened. So all this is being predicted. And then you get to Habakkuk chapter 2, he's going to say, get this vision. What vision? The vision that the Babylonians are going to be raised up in this miraculous way and they're going to come and destroy us. Get that and make it plain upon tables. Stand as a watchman to show that it's going to happen, and everyone's going to say what? It's not going to happen because we've just read that in Isaiah 28. They don't believe that's going to happen. So that's, you can do Habakkuk. The same story in Ezekiel 9. So when you go to Isaiah 28, I'm saying these teachers are going to teach them via punishment. Now, we can go ahead and make an application of this. So, the reason I said priest and prophet is because you're comparing two classes of people. You're comparing one class that have erred and another class that are not going to err or make a mistake. Who errs? Priests and prophets. Therefore, the people that are going to be used as a substitute of them must by definition be priests and prophets. That's the first argument, using the rule of compare and contrast. So we did this, verse 7 and verse 9, priests and prophets. Therefore, we have to fill in these blank spaces. These two would be priests and prophets. Compare and contrast. So these are priests and prophets in God's church. So who would these be? I'm saying these, in their literal context, is the king of the north. How does the king of the north here become a prophet? Because he understands visions. And we went to Daniel 8:23 and 11:14. 11:14, he establishes the vision. I understand that that vision is a later phenomena. I understand that. 8:23, again, I understand that to be a later phenomena, but I'm taking those and making an application to bring them back, because historically these are way in the future. But these people understand their role in life. And all a vision is, it's a message from God that isn't for today. It's a message of God that's going to happen in the future. It's just a prediction. That's what a vision really is. And the Chaldeans know what they're supposed to be doing. They know they're supposed to go and destroy people or punish them. So that's how they become prophets. That's the suggestion that I'm making. And why did they become priests? Because it says in verse 7, the priests are dealing with judgment and the prophets are dealing with visions. So judgment is that very thing. They know who to judge and they know what judgment to bring. So Zedekiah, they know to kill his sons and they know to pluck his eyes out. Plucking his eyes out because God wants to demonstrate that who is this group of people? They're Laodiceans. They're totally blind. They've come to complete and utter blindness. It's not like they're having eyes that they cannot see. Now they don't even have eyes to see. His children are killed. As soon as you go from father or parent to children, you're dealing with what subject? Sorry? Can't hear you? Fourth generation, yeah, I think that's what I heard. Yeah, so now you're dealing with the fourth generation. So this group of people are all going to be killed because you've come to the culmination of destruction or judgment. So I'm saying the judgment here, that these people are able to bring proper judgment. First of all, they don't make any mistakes in their judgment. They bring righteous judgment. They kill who needs to be killed, or punish who needs to be punished, and save or spare those who don't. So Gedaliah and Baruch and Jeremiah are all people who are not going to be killed, and they're not insignificant people. They're major people not necessarily royalty, but they're high enough to be punished. They have that status in society, but they're going to be spared. So I'm saying the king of the north is able to judge righteously, makes the proper judgment, and he understands his role in life. So that's why I'm making that application there. I'm not even saying it's an application, I think that's the original intent of those words. What we then do is we make an application, and we make that priest and that prophet us, when we go from the natural to the spiritual. So we can do that, make this application that this is talking about us. And the only reason I wanted us to see that is because in our movement we've accepted that we're priests for a number of years now, and everybody thinks that's a benign title, like priest, it's no big deal. Because there's a Spirit Prophecy quote that says the primary role of the priests were as what? To be teachers. That's their primary role. I don't know if you used the word primary. So we don't mind being called priests, but we don't want to be called prophets, because prophets have a totally different connotation to them. You know, what gives you the authority to make these predictions? Did you have a dream or a vision? And we're going to say no. Then we kind of indicate that we're second-rate prophets, because you have this two-tier prophet system. But when it comes to priests, the argument that I wanted to make was that these priests here, these were ordained by God. The priests that it's referring to here are the priests of the house of Aaron, or the order of Aaron. And that brings us to Hebrews chapter 7. So we didn't turn to Hebrews chapter 7, so let's turn to Hebrews chapter 7 to see why this is such a difficult subject that we really haven't delved into as a people. I just want to comment on this. It's just an interesting story. I don't know, some of the brethren know this. All of us, I'm sure all of us don't know this. I think nearly 2 years ago, 2016, we were on a mission trip to one of the Caribbean islands, and we went there and we met a group of people who were a ministry that used to be involved in this movement, and they'd separated from us in the separation of 2014, 2015. They'd walked away and started doing their own thing. And they came to the series of meetings that we were holding, and we had a couple of discussions before we started studying with them. And the discussion, went along the lines, what is the problem that they have with us? What are they not accepting or rejecting? And one of the primary arguments that they had was that they had seen a video, or been shown a video, of Elder Jeb saying that he was Melchizedek. And they said, the only person who's Melchizedek is Jesus, obviously from Hebrews 7. And for Elder Jeff to promote himself to be Melchizedek was blasphemous. And so they were certain that this movement was in outright and open apostasy. And all the accusations against us were true, because the leader of the movement is calling himself Melchizedek, or assigning himself the title of Christ. And the first thing I did was say, what's this video? I never heard of this video before. Show it to me to see if it's genuine. They said, oh yeah, we'll bring you the video and show it to you. And that night I was really sort of meditating, contemplating about what is this thing about El just calling himself Melchizedek? Surely he wouldn't be doing that. And then it clicked to me. Then I thought, I don't think I've even spoken to him about it to ask if he really said that or not. So I just took them at face value. And we met the next day. I said, oh yeah, Melchizedek, that's good. It's not a problem. So we started going through the story of Melchizedek, and 10 minutes into this story, you can verify it because my brethren here, I said, Melchizedek, this is the reason why he's talking about Melchizedek. And one of those same brethren who were accusing Elder Jeff said, that means I'm Melchizedek as well. And they could see it straight away. It only took about 10 minutes for them to self-identify that they too were Melchizedek. And the whole issue sort of diffused itself. So this subject about us being Melchizedek sounds funny, but it's really important for us to see. And the reason why people don't want to, for us to understand or to see or accept that we are Melchizedek is because Melchizedek is a high priest, Jesus is the high priest, and his role is to forgive sins. And so you see the implications of what it means to be of the order of Melchizedek is that we're saying if you're a priest, you're not just a teacher, you're able to do what? Forgive sins. And people are obviously going to object to that, and they're going to turn that into this, deeply offensive moral perspective to say, who are you to come and judge us? This is blasphemy or blasphemous grounds that you're entering into. And I'm saying, this has to all be understood in what terms, in what framework. Parables. It's all about parables. If you don't understand about parables, you can make some silly and grave mistakes, bad conclusions. So the primary thing I want us to see, if you're of the order of Aaron and you become a priest, does that mean you're a good person? No. Because the qualification of being a priest is that your father was a priest. We have clear evidence of that. You've got Caiaphas, a wicked man. You have got Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, evil people. Everyone knows they're evil, but they're priests. One of them is going to be groomed for what role? One of them is going to become the high priest, and he's not going to suddenly become good. And no one can object to him becoming a high priest, because it's all about your pedigree, where you come from. And then you get this totally different system that Melchizedek says what? I'm going to be a high priest. And they say, based upon what principle? Was your dad a high priest? And he says, no. They say, well, what makes you a high priest then? So what makes Melchizedek a high priest? What authority does he make that statement? Sorry? His own. He just says, I'm standing up and I'm going to be a high priest. And they said, well, what qualifies you for that? He says, because I'm righteous. So he's righteous in his own being, and it's not because of his pedigree or heritage or family tree. He stands alone. He can't confer this to whom? To his children. He can't confer it. It's a one-off phenomena. You can't go backwards and you can't go forwards. It's an individual experience, all based upon who you are. Christ has all of those characteristics. He has the wrong parents. He doesn't have any children. So on what basis does he become a priest? He has to use the same rules of Melchizedek. And so we see what has to happen is there's a law that has to be destroyed. And Paul marks this in Hebrews 7. He says there has to be a disannulling of the law so that Jesus can become a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And I'm saying that same concept must now be brought to us. So on what basis did we ever become priests? Because we're not ordained ministers, and that ordination process always happens by the laying on of hands. And we've just broken all the rules because we said no one laid hands upon us. We just did it by ourselves. On what basis does that happen? And the automatic answer people give is because of Christ's righteousness. But we know that can't be, because if it's Christ's righteousness, you've already broken the rule of Melchizedek. Because Melchizedek does upon his own righteousness. So we become priests based upon our own righteousness. And not only the people outside of the movement object to that, when I say things like that, people in the inside object to this issue, like saying, are you telling me you're self-righteous? And that's where we have to come to a discussion on the nature of man and how that nature works and how it operates and where is our righteousness found? Is it found in an external person, or is it our own walk with God, our own personal experience? And I think there's overwhelming evidence that says that justification, Christ swaps places with us. He takes our garment and receives what punishment? Death. He has to receive death because he's unrighteous. And therefore, we receive his garment, making us righteous. And that receiving of his garment becomes our garment. It becomes our righteousness. That's our claim to fame. That's our qualification of being a priest of the order of Melchizedek, is that we are now stating that we have righteousness that was given to us. Of course it was given to us, but once it was given to us, it becomes ours, and therefore to be of the order of Melchizedek is this high calling. It's not just being a teacher. And if we were going to compare priests and prophets, I think the more difficult one to assent to, or not to prove, but to live up to, is the order of a priest after Melchizedek's order. Because whatever you remit on earth, it gets remitted in heaven. We all know that. Whatever decisions are being made here on earth, when you start interacting with someone and you start condemning them because of their rejection of what you're teaching, they're not going to make a different decision in heaven, are they? Because not only are we priests and prophets, we're also ambassadors. And we spoke a little bit about ambassadorships yesterday, Elder Jeff did, when we spoke about the State Department. When an ambassador speaks, it's the same thing as what? It's the president, as the leader of that nation speaking. You don't say, well, I don't like what you say, I want to go to the boss. You don't have access to that boss. The person in front of you is the de facto boss for you. So if you're an ambassador and you make a statement, then that is law. When David is ruling and one of his allies dies and his son takes over and he sends ambassadors to the son, what does that son do? He gets persuaded that this is a trick. He cuts the backside of their trousers or their robes, shows their buttocks, and they go home in disgrace. And they know what's going to happen. What's going to happen? It has to be war. Because that insult was not to a nobody ambassador. That insult was as though it was given to David. And David can't stand by and let that be ignored. You touch the ambassador, you touched the nation. So we know that this role of priests is a lot more serious than just us standing up and being teachers. We have a responsibility which we call the message of life and death. You accept or reject what we teach, you receive life or death. So that's how I think you can go from the priests and prophets being the king of the north to making an application that this is referring to us here at the end of the world, that we're both priests and we're prophets. We understand visions and we're able to make correct judgment based upon not people's morality but people's response to prophecy. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy. As we have discussed the subject of comparing and contrasting in the context of parable teaching, as we have gone through a few Bible passages, help us, Lord, to be able to study for ourselves as we approach your word, to see how these parables operate, how we can compare and contrast two different objects or entities or people or doctrines, to be able to discern the true import of the things that we're reading. We ask that you would guide us and bless us in this endeavour. In Jesus' name, amen.